Hello and welcome, everybody. This is the Webster Film Series presentation of On the Rocks with Dr. Diane Carson, who I will introduce in just a second. But as some latecomers perhaps log in, I thought I would talk about the film series for a minute. So I imagine most of you know who we are and what we do. Just a quick recap is that we are St. Louis's only year-round nonprofit cinema. This year is our 42nd year. Under normal circumstances, we show movies in person in the Winifred Moore Auditorium on Webster University's main campus in St. Louis, Missouri. We have not been doing that for a little over a year now, something like 53 weeks. We have not shown any movies in person in Winifred Moore. And I'm not expecting to be able to again until August. So we're going to remain closed for a while. But in the meantime, we're doing a lot of virtual programming. Of course, we're doing these virtual discussion events like the one that you're attending right now. We also have a virtual cinema right now where we book the films for you to rent just on your computer that we would normally show in person in Winifred Moore. So as we speak, we have kind of a lot of movies in the virtual theater. Under normal circumstances, we tend to only have just one or two in there at a time. But right now, there are two that end after tonight. There's an American documentary called The Shape of Things to Come, which is about a strange man who lives off the grid in the desert. It's a documentary. It's kind of fuzzy in terms of how much of it is real, but I'll leave that for you to discover. And then there's also another movie that, again, kind of blurs the line between fiction and documentary, an experimental film called The Inheritance. That's about, yeah, Diane reviewed that for KDHX. But again, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the plug. I'll come back to Diane in a minute. She's a film critic, though, of course, which is, I'm sorry, just ran into my own desk. So both A Shape of Things to Come and The Inheritance, they close after today, but if you rent them today, you'll have a full 3-day period to watch them. So it's $12. We get half of that. That's what helps us keep afloat, basically, while the theater is closed. But yeah, so if you rented tonight, you'd have through the weekend to watch it. And then also continuing, we have 3 films by the Brazilian director Maia Darin. There's kind of a main feature called The Fever, which was new last year. It played in the prestigious New Directors, New Films Film Festival in New York, which was virtual last year, but still. And then we have 2 supplementary documentaries, Lands and Margin. Lands and Margin are both on the short side. They're about an hour long a piece, and The Fever is an hour and a half or 2 hours. The Fever is a fiction film, Lands and Margin are not. But yeah, The Fever is $12 to rent for 3 days, and Lands and Margin are $8 each for 3 days. Honestly, of the 3, I might start with Lands. If you're inclined to check her out, Lands is I like all 3 quite a bit, but Lands is my favorite of the 3. And with it being a cheaper one, there's, I don't know, a lighter lift to see if you kind of click into her vibe. So that's what's in the theater right now. But then starting tomorrow, we have one of my favorite films that I've booked in the virtual cinema so far. It has a title that is difficult to talk about in a polite way. It's about the artist / activist David Wojnarowicz. Wojnarowicz is Wojnarowicz, so it's not immediately recognizable what word I'm even saying here, Wojnarowicz, I think. But yeah, the full title is Wojnarowicz F-U, F-word, F-er. There's a lot of asterisks in our description of the film. That's the title of one of his artworks. If you know him, my feeling is if you know his art, you probably know he did a very famous piece where it's a picture of him as a little boy, but it's got kind of this essay wrapped around his head. One day this boy. It's officially called Untitled, but yeah, One Day This Boy. Anyway, that documentary is incredible. That opens tomorrow, and it's sponsored by QFest St. Louis. St. Louis's LGBTQ film festival that's put on by Cinema St. Louis, the same people put on the St. Louis International Film Festival in November. And QFest, incidentally, just announced their lineup earlier this week. So if you go to cinemastlouis.org, you can see the QFest lineup, which I haven't seen much of yet, but it looks solid, and I'm excited to dig further into it. After tonight, tonight is the final March of Coppola event. And then next week, we get into April Fulci's. So the next 5 Thursdays in a row, we're studying the Italian director Lucio Fulci. And our speakers are interesting, I'm happy to say. I mean, our speakers are always interesting. But next week specifically, we have the novelist Kia Wilson. And then 2 weeks from today, we have the genre film journalist. He goes by Dr. AC. His real name is Aaron Christensen, but he's won a Rondo Award for genre film journalism. Then geez, April 15th, we have Andy Treifenbach, who's the longtime programmer of Late Night Grindhouse here in town. The following Thursday, we've got Aaron Aubuchon, who teaches a horror film class here at Webster University. And then the last Thursday of the month, we have Troy Howarth, who is a biographer of Fulci. But yeah, we've got registration prizes and things. So if you register and attend any of those events, we've got puzzles to give away from Messed Up Puzzles. We've got a copy of Kia Wilson's book to give away from Left Bank Books. A lot of fun stuff like that. So I encourage you to check it out. Also, I wanted to take a quick second and say, I found out pretty shortly before our event that we're here for tonight that there is an opposite event, like a Stop Asian Hate event, which I'm sorry to not be able to go to, and I'm sorry to be programmed opposite to. So I just wanted to speak out in solidarity with the Stop Asian Hate campaign. And yeah, I'm sorry that we all can't be there to join that event as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that brings me, well, not the Stop Asian Hate part, but that makes me run out of things to say. So I'll introduce our speaker, Dr. Diane Carson. Diane taught at St. Louis Community College Merrimack for a matter of decades. She was there when I was a film student. And I wasn't a film student at Merrimack. I was a film student at Webster, actually. But I remember when I was an 18-year-old film student, I would hear how good Diane was. I didn't know her at the time, but there was this kind of funny, I don't know, like a lot of my friends would talk about this really great film professor at Merrimack. It's like, well, I can't take her classes. I'm in a different school. But yeah, so I'd heard a lot about Diane's reputation, and I came to become familiar with her work as a film critic for KDHX, which is 88.1 FM in St. Louis. She's also a film critic with the Alliance of Women Film Journalists. But yeah, so I heard more and more about her work, and then I got a job as a film critic when I was 21 or 22, and I kind of started to see you around. And over the course of the years, we became friends. So now you're just like an old friend. But yeah, you were like this legend for a while before I met you, where I knew so much about you, but I'd never actually been introduced to you. But yeah, we work with Diane as much as we can. Diane's good about speaking with in-person events a lot of times too. She's a filmmaker. A year or two ago, just before the pandemic, we featured her newest film, Other People's Footage. The second Other People's Footage. She's made two of them with Robert Johnson. But yeah, so Diane does a lot, and she's here tonight to talk about On the Rocks. So I will get out of her way and let you take the floor, Diane.
Thanks, Pete. I think it just says how obsessed I am with film. There you go. I want to compliment Pete too on what he has done with the film series, especially this past year when you just couldn't do things in a normal way, but you have managed to continue in an extraordinary way to keep things going. And the films have just been spectacular. I have learned a lot of new directors. I have seen a lot of films I had never seen before. So I want to really put in a plug for the film series. They're the ones that I gravitate to. But I will move on to tonight's film. And the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the people in the film. But then what I want to do is to move into the film itself. And at any point, I would really like this to be a discussion and an interaction. So at any point when you have comments or questions or, I didn't see it that way, or, oh, notice this or that, I just think that's the best. That's what I always loved about teaching film is I always learned as much from my students and their observations. So anytime you want to jump in, I'm perfectly happy. Don't feel like you're interrupting a canned lecture, because this is going to be as informal as possible. So first of all, I am going to go to sharing my screen and put up the PowerPoint as soon as I can get this open. Okay. Whoops. And now, however, though, I can't do share my screen. Okay, there's share my screen. Okay. And then I'll make this, I'll go to the slideshow. Okay. So I hope everybody can see that. If it's not working, please weigh in and let us know. Okay, so On the Rocks. And I'm going to start moving through this. You all already know a lot about Sophia after the last three really terrific sessions on her. I will only say that, of course, this is also highly autobiographical, and we'll talk about some of those issues and topics and connections. Most important, I think she said she wanted to do a film about a father and a daughter for, I'm sure you all realize, quite obvious reasons. This is her seventh film, which I think is fantastic. The other thing that really factors in here is that in 2011, she married the musician Thomas Mars, and she has two daughters. And so we have the father-daughter, and then we also have, of course, what it's like to be a mother with two daughters, as we have with Laura in the film, and the demands on life and where your attention almost always has to go. Okay, so you already know quite a lot about her. Rashida Jones, I'll bet you also know a lot about her because she is well known for all of her roles in film and television. She was born in '76, the daughter of Peggy Lipton and Quincy Jones. I always loved Peggy Lipton in the old days on television. So I love that there's a connection there, and my love of the Sofia Coppola things and Rashida Jones acting. Anyway, she was raised in Reform Judaism. She went to Hebrew school, but she left at the age of 10. She went to Harvard. She plays classical music. I mean, this woman is multi-talented. She was going to become a lawyer, but she became so disillusioned by the O.J. Simpson murder trial that she changed her major to religion and philosophy, and she graduated in 1997. She has made it very clear throughout all of her acting and writing, et cetera, that she is very proud of her biracial heritage and practicing Judaism. And she says she feels strongly about Jewish traditions. In fact, as a kind of side interesting note, at one point, Tupac Shakur said something about her, something rather negative or critical about her biracial status. And she very firmly answered back, and they ended up becoming friends. So that gives us all hope for confronting people if they don't seem to understand or have empathy, and moving beyond that to actually having a connection. Most people probably know her from TV's Parks and Recreation, as well as The Office, the film Social Network, I Love You Man. In 2018, this I think just shows her affinity with her role in the film. She had a son with her boyfriend, the musician Ezra Koenig. Talking about her being so talented, she also co-wrote Toy Story 4, and she has been very active with Peace First. She has campaigned for Democratic presidential candidates, and she's won a couple of NAACP awards. So she is just a really outstanding human being, as well as I think a great actor in this film. And I probably don't need to say any more about this man, do I? I think everybody knows Bill Murray, 70 years old now, and he has six children. 6 sons, in fact, 2 with his first wife and 4 sons with his second wife. So I'm sure he can also identify with the grandpa role that he is playing, the role he's playing. You may have seen some pictures of him. I love sports also, and you may have seen some, so I was interested in this. You may have seen pictures of him with Louisville basketball head coach, Chris Mack, because with his grandson on his lap, because one of his sons, Luke, was the assistant under that head coach. Anyway, he has homes multiple places. And if you're not familiar with it, there is a documentary on Bill Murray that I think is just so delightful. It's called Bill Murray Stories. And it's just about how he drops in on people's lives. And it's just a joy. You feel like you know him so well by the end of it. And he'll just show up at people's parties and get into their wedding pictures. And he's just delightful. So I recommend that documentary if you haven't seen it. Then a picture of Coppola and Murray together. And then Marlon Wayans. He is 48, born in New York City, in a housing project. His family was Jehovah's Witnesses. He's the youngest of 10 siblings. And I'm sure you probably know the Wayans brothers. I probably don't need to say too much more about him either. When he began in Living Color with his brothers, the Wayan Brothers show from 92 to 99. He attended Howard University for a while. He dropped out after 2 years to pursue his acting career. So that's just a little bit about the people in the film, gives you a little bit of background. Okay. A few things that I want to talk about in the course of the film, not just right now, but as we go through the film. And my reaction when I first saw On the Rocks, which is, it was just open this past October, it was just accessible this past October, is that it is accessible. It's much more casual and familiar than many of the other Sofia Coppola films. And for that reason, I think it both has resonated with people, sometimes in good ways. Some people, I'll talk about that later, some people have not been so impressed with it. But to me, it is like a very sweet bonbon that you think is, well, this is just so light. There's not that much to it. And as you start rewatching it, thinking about it, and digging down into it, I think you realize there's a lot more truth and honesty and heart and soul than maybe at first blush. She makes it look so casual, so off the cuff. Often, especially with Murray, of course, deadpan with a restrained kind of humor, a jazz atmosphere with Chet Baker. I'm going to come back to that. Oops, sorry, I messed up. I hit my mouse, which I didn't mean to do. Very distinctive voice throughout the film. And as I mentioned already, and I think very transparently, very autobiographical. I mentioned this before, Sofia wanted to write and direct a father-daughter story. And I think I would add to that also one about marriage with children, since that is one of the important themes, and that's also part of her life when she was working on this. What else is it about, though? It's about business demands and the obsession with a startup, the obsession that Dean has with getting his job going, with getting his business going, and with making Laura proud of him. And so there's an awful lot, I think, balance on both sides of this ledger in terms of Laura and Dean, which I think is one of the true accomplishments of this film. And we get men's versus women's point of view on relationships and biology, mostly from Bill Murray, Felix. There is in this also kind of fear, a paranoia that her husband is cheating on her. And also ultimately a kind of idealism takes over, especially when Murray says, we all just want to be loved, which of course we do. We do all just want to be loved. And it's a very profound truth that is just presented very matter-of-factly, very straightforward. And that's not an easy thing to do. In terms of the production, it was a 28-day shoot, low budget, of course. The camera doesn't move much. It's pretty much locked down with the focus on the interaction and the dialogue. So that's what we pay attention to, are the characters, the people in the film. She loves faces and reactions, and we're going to look at a couple of those. And her films have been described as slow-moving portraits with a bittersweet emotional palette. And I think that's a good description of this film. Just a couple of production stills. I always like these, and then you get a chance to also kind of look at what is in the art direction. And I'm sure everybody noticed the Bernie tag, the Stacey Abrams. We get a few little comments in there that I think are just lovely, incidental, but meaningful as well. And another production still that I like. Okay, now I want to set the mood by going to the Chet Baker song that plays about 30 seconds into the film.
I fall in love too easily. I fall in love too fast. I fall in love too terribly hard.
Up. Oh crap, I lost it. Okay, you get the mood. That's probably enough for it anyway. I don't want to, you can go back and play the whole song on your own sometime. I was telling Pete and Jessica when we started this that it's become such a cliche ever since the Jerry Maguire film that, you had me at whatever it was. And for me, it was, as soon as I heard Chet Baker, it's like, okay, I'm there. You got me. I love his velvet voice. I love the mood he sets. And she really introduces this film with almost a dichotomy. We first hear actually Felix in voiceover saying, "And remember, don't give your heart to any boys. You're mine until you get married, and then you're still mine." And so that is kind of the umbrella that hangs over the film, and she is still his. And I think there's never any doubt how much he loves her and cares for her. And then we go to the Chet Baker song. And then we also hear Chris Rock, who has the opposite, much harsher point of view. Interesting about this song, I think, is that the lyrics were by Sammy Kahn, written one night in Palm Springs. It won, Sinatra introduced it in 45 in Anchors Away. It won the Oscar for its music, but the song lost to Rodgers and Hammerstein's It Might As Well Be Spring. So you know what I would have voted for. This, hands down, hands down. Okay, so then we get into establishing who Laura is. Many people in reviews have commented on their wonderful Soho apartment, but I think it's also very meaningful. We can see outside, we can see clearly, but she's not seeing clearly when she starts suspecting her husband of philandering, of cheating on her. And of course, a lot of that comes from both knowing her father as well as she does, but also what happens early in the film when he comes home from a trip and climbs into bed and starts kissing her and then goes, oh, like he just woke up and didn't know where he was or who he was with. And so that immediately sets the mood for having some suspicions. Okay, I want to go through these pretty quickly because I'm hoping that you might want to jump in on some of these pretty soon. And then we have her out on the street, where we see her out on the streets of New York several times. I mean, this really is a New York film. And I think that Coppola uses the location quite deliberately and quite effectively. We actually move around a lot of different spaces in this film. And I think that gives it some momentum as well as a lot of complexity. We're in public places, we're in private places, we're out on the street, we're in the school. I like the combination of all of those things. Okay, let me jump ahead here. This is the first scene between her and between Laura. I mean, I want to keep trying to call them by their names in the film, between Laura and Dean, after she has discovered the case in his suitcase. And she has some questions about that. We also see her just doing motherly things. And again, I think this gives it a lot of texture. A lot of times in domestic films, we might say, it's clear that the person either who has written it, or maybe it was in the script, but the person who directed it has taken out so many of those little moments that really populate the days of a mother or the days of any individual. And so I think it is, again, to her credit, and she knows the territory, that we get some very familiar and common things that anybody does. We see her interaction. This is the first scene with Felix when he shows up in his chauffeured Mercedes, of course, and he gives the speech about evolution, and of course plants the seed that your husband is definitely cheating on you. We got to hire a detective to find out. She checks his phone. She's back with her dad. After that, they go to ballet, and then they're back home. I really love how he is involved in all aspects, once he's back there, in all aspects of her life and the children's lives, both in the ballet, in the apartment. This is the scene that really starts, I think, digging into these issues, and we also see, I think, kind of what a rogue he is, that, he's going to let them watch Breaking Bad. So I agree with Laura. It doesn't seem quite age appropriate to me. But this is also when the issue comes in and she says, her daughter says, I want to wear my hair long and pretty. And she says, Laura says, or you can wear it short or however you want to wear it. And she says, long and pretty. Her daughter says, long and pretty. She says, or you can wear it short. You're going to grow up and you're going to be strong women who can wear their hair however they like. This is a real interesting exchange at this point. And of course, any of these, I used to always ask in my film classes, what does this scene accomplish? You know, kind of what we call scene justification. And it reveals her beliefs and her stand. And it also, of course, helps develop even further Murray's personality and Murray's attitude, though I think we have him pretty quickly. If anybody wants to jump in at any of these points, just say. And he is just, and the two daughters too, are just so charming. And this seems, I mean, I felt like I was just right there in the scene with these people, with the grandpa, with the kids, having a terrific time. And it's natural, it's contagious. And if you've ever tried to direct a film or direct a scene like this, you know how hard it is to do something that has so much personality that doesn't feel the least bit forced, especially with two children. And you just know Murray is having a great time. I mean, Murray, for me, Murray steals every scene he's in. That's probably because I'm such a big Bill Murray fan, but he is just so relaxed. And again, he can do it, but to get the children involved also is a credit both to him and to Sofia Coppola. I've been very interested in acting for about the last decade. And so it's always interesting to me to watch the interaction, the moods, the reactions of the characters. I'm gonna have to kind of watch my time here and move along. I don't know if I can get this. If you give me just a minute here. No, it's not going to play. What I was going to try to do was play, not to show the clip, but just to play the sound for the scene between.
Hey,
Here it is.
Felix, back in town. I am. Yes, you are. Been busy? Yeah. Got a lot going on. Do you? Yeah. Well, you good? Yeah, I'm good. All right. You? I'm great. Good night. Good night.
That is a very short scene, and yet it is so perfect. I've heard a couple of people talk about this scene, just the intonations in Bill Murray's voice, the way he says, yeah, I'm good, which just conveys, and I assume Dean gets it, maybe not, but it just conveys volumes about everything he thinks. You know, you've been busy. Yeah, I've been busy. Yeah. You good? Yeah, I'm good. You know, are you good? So good writing. And of course, Sofia wrote this as well. And then I mentioned before that she loves reaction shots. And when Bill Murray leaves, this is the reaction shot that we get, which again, if a shot says something, you don't need a line. And she is so good at just using a reaction shot to convey everything she wants to convey about emotions, attitudes, evaluation, judgment, without stopping the film for that. So I'm paying attention to reaction shots, to the acting, to the voice intonation, and voices are so important as well. And Murray, of course, is just an expert at this. Okay, so he leaves on his business trip. And then I love the Rashida Jones too, is just fabulous with the expressions as her friend is babbling on to her about what's going on. And you know, she's not hearing one word of it because she's in her own mind trying to figure out what's going on and what she needs to do. And another scene with Murray. I actually said this is when they're on their way to dinner. I actually said in the review that I wrote about this, because this happens actually right before this scene, that Bill Murray makes just smelling flowers. You may remember the scene in the apartment when he just leans over and smells the flowers. And I said, he makes smelling flowers look fantastic. Like, oh my gosh, that's all I want to do for the rest of my day. And their interaction is excellent in the dinner scene. The table where Bogart proposed to Bacall, and he gives her his watch, which of course will become the token that at the very end of the film, in a very symbolic gesture, is replaced by Dean with the birthday present, which is the watch that he gives to Laura, and she takes her father's watch off and puts his watch on. So this will circulate through the film and become very important. He also tells her at this point, though, and I think this is very important. So I say, this is good writing. I'm not worried about you, kiddo. You've got brains, beauty, and character, which is the most important thing a person can have. And that's what I mean when I say that this film has a lot of heart and soul. And yet, of course, he still can't help flirting with and talking to everybody that he sees there. This is also when he goes on talking about women at their most beautiful between the ages of 30, 35 and 39. They're like flowers. They're all beautiful at any age, even dried flowers. And he can't imagine why any woman would do anything, have any kind of plastic surgery. You know, he holds forth on a lot of his ideas. He's very honest. He's very straightforward. And then another scene with her, with a friend, this time outdoors. You know, again, there's a lot of variety in this film, which I think keeps it moving. Back indoors, she still can't write. And then probably the most famous scene in the film, which is in the lovely red Alfa Romeo, and he has brought the caviar along. Now, most people talk about this scene that, I mean, it's a wonderful scene. But most people interpret it also as, this is probably exactly how Sofia Coppola felt so many times with her famous father. And of course, he gets out of the ticket because he knows everybody. In fact, they end up giving the car a push firing. I mean, it's just a delightful and unexpected scene as they're there with the binoculars spying on Dean. This is the scene that most people talk about and that they love so much. Okay, I'm going to try to get through the rest of these pretty quickly because I want to have time to discuss. This is where he presents her with the evidence. And says, yep, you know, after the detective checked everything out, yes, we have evidence. And then they have to stop at the party. Or no, I'm sorry, first they go and they have their cocktails. I think this is the scene in which he talks about the hard wiring. You know, he has his attitude toward men and women. And then she says, maybe he's just not that interested in me anymore. And Felix says, impossible. And then he says, you're going to be all right. And then this Chet Baker song plays. If I can get it to come out and not come up and not have it interrupted. And again, what this does is it reestablishes the mood. But it also has very meaningful lyrics.
I get along without you very well. Of course I do. Except when soft rains fall and drip from leaves, then I recall the thrill of being sheltered in your arms. Of course I do. But I get along without you very well.
Okay, I will stop it there, though I could listen to Chet Baker forever. But of course, what he's singing is "I can get along very well without you," which of course is exactly the opposite of what she is actually feeling. And then they look at the Monet, which is, of course, connecting with and developing a little bit more of Felix's career, because we understand that he has been an art dealer, and it comes up several times. The film is very nicely weaving together so many of the themes that she introduces early that then come back later and then come back again and then come back again. You know, we never lose the threads. To me, it's like a very finely woven tapestry that she will plant an idea early, and she doesn't drive it into the ground. She will bring it back, and then she'll bring it back, and then she'll bring it back. And of course, after that, very meditative scene where Laura is walking down the street, but you know, she's having doubts about herself at that point. You know, that's right after she said, maybe she's just not that interested in me anymore. You know, she's having her own self-doubts. And then, of course, they have to go to Manzanillo, Mexico. This struck me immediately as it's very much like what happens so often in Shakespearean plays, or so many times in other films, which is that you have to leave, quote, civilization, you have to leave the city, you have to get out of where you have been and get back into nature to set things straight again. Again, this is Midsummer Night's Dream all over again. She goes away from New York City, and he's very different here also. He also gets more in touch with himself. He talks about Holly, his second wife, and how touched he is that, you know, did you know she died? You know, I never thought she died before me. He's very touched and very choked up at that point. And so they get away from the city so that they can rediscover and reconnect with their emotional depths, reconnect with their souls, set things right again. And this is also when, of course, she has, that's when they're going to be spying on, they think, on Dean and his assistant. And if anything says we have to get back to nature in order to see clearly, here we have Bill Murray behind the fronds. And then once we're back in New York, she does have to tell him exactly how she has felt and the pain that she has felt. And she does. She's very honest. He's always been very honest. But I think there's never any question, and I think that's part of what is so truly touching about this film. There's never any question about how much they like each other. They love each other. They care about each other. They're connected to each other. Even with all the difficulties and separations and differences they have, because they are diametric opposites on men versus women, especially given the things that Bill Murray says. Now, 3 weeks ago, I loved when Pete said, you know, the feminists are coming. Well, here's one of them. And Bill Murray speaks what we've all heard. You know, we've all heard these ideas. And so I admire that Coppola parades them out there. She lets us grapple with them. She lets us grapple with a Bill Murray, I shouldn't say Bill Murray, Felix, who has these ideas and will dispute them with Laura, with his daughter. So we have an older generation, a younger generation, men versus women. But there also, of course, is that scene when he says to her, what happened to you? You used to be fun. And that's perhaps, I think, the most painful indictment that comes through the course of the entire film. And then, of course, there is the interaction at the end with Felix. Now, here is the one part of the film that I wish were not there. Not this part where he pretty much professes his love. He says, in fact, why didn't you just ask me? Which that's easier said than done for sure. It's not so easy to ask about something like that. But he says, I don't want to be with anyone else. I just wanted to be enough for you and them, which is totally understandable. But that encounter with Felix is the only time we see Laura actually break down into tears. And years ago, there was an article written that said at some point in, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very high percentage of movies, the woman will either be driven to hysteria, i.e. almost every horror film, to become completely hysterical and emotional, or she will break down into tears at some point because she just can't control her emotions. And she will be driven to that. She's so sensitive. She's too sensitive. She overreacts. And when they're having their conversation, she's the one who does almost all the apologizing. So I would love to modify that a little bit. Aside from that, I really don't have any objections to what I say. And again, I referenced this at the very beginning. When Felix gives Laura the watch, it's going to come back very nicely at the end. This would be a great script to teach for script writing, because things that are planted early will be resolved at the very end of the film. So when she replaces her dad's watch with Dean's watch, it's almost as though she has now separated from dad, though he's always going to be there. The kids are going to always love the grandpa, and merged with Dean. Now they're on the same plane. Now they understand each other. And finally, we have to end with the cartoon. Your suspicions were correct. This is in the Private Eye's office. Your husband's an honest man who cares deeply about you. What else do you need to say? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I hope some of you have some ideas that you would like to talk about, of the things that she has raised, that Sophia has raised, some of the things maybe that Bill Murray, Felix has said, some of the things that do or don't happen in the film. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or to hear people's observations and your own reactions to the film. If you don't have any, I will read to you part of a review of the film, but I'd rather hear from all of you.
We have a couple already, actually.
Oh,
But
good.
before I get to reading those, I did want to point out, when I was going through your long resume, of course I had to, cut it for time and just things that, I don't know, that came to mind immediately. But I did want to point out that you edited a book, Multiple Voices in Feminist Film Criticism. But yeah, one of several books that you edited, it came to mind that I should pull that off the shelf when you were talking about your
Thank you.
feminist read toward the end of the film. So the first question that came through is from our friend Joshua Ray. He
Thank you,
points out-
Joshua.
Yeah. He
And
points
great
out that-
presentation yesterday, too, I have to say. Please tell everyone involved with that. That was great on Atlantics.
Yeah, we go to a lot of, there's a group of us that go to a lot of these film events, but there was one yesterday that Joshua had a hand in. Anyway, Joshua says, Diane did a great talk last year for Cinema St. Louis's Golden Anniversaries event about It Happened One Night, where you talked a bit about the screwball comedy. On the Rocks struck me as a direct homage to these films, particularly Lubitsch and a bit of Sturges and also some Wilder. There's also a lot about privilege and money in those movies, like What's Here in The Martians.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. You're absolutely right. This film, there's so many times, and it doesn't come through in my kind of running through what I think are the most important scenes and issues in the film, but there's so many times in this film that I'm just laughing. And most of it, of course, is Murray's rejoinders to things. But sometimes it's just the situations also. And always screwball comedies, of course, there was Stanley Cavell's book about the comedies of remarriage. They don't get divorced and come back together, but that's what happens in so many of the screwball comedies, that the marriage is disrupted. I mean, The Awful Truth, It Happened One Night, The Lady, all of those screwball comedies. The marriage is disrupted and then has to be resolved. And they often also, by the way, will end up leaving the city, leaving civilization, going to nature in order to be able to see the truth about each other. But thank you for that. You're absolutely right that it has so many screwball comedy anchors and roots. And I'm sure she knows those films too. I'm sure she probably knows film backward and forward.
Well, I'll point out too, this isn't really necessarily relevant to the conversation at hand about screwball comedy, but you also did a great presentation last year, again, for Cinema St. Louis on The Conformist. But I think that points to your range, that inside of 1 year, you've done a really good presentation on It Happened One Night from 1934, then The Conformist, which is a completely opposite film from 1970, Italy, and now here the 2020 film, the newest film we'll probably do in the entire like the director's series that we've got going on now. But yeah, you're a very good player
Well,
to have on hand.
that's the wonderfulness of film, is that, you can jump in any year, any genre, and with a good filmmaker. And I really think, I'm sure this has come through in all the things I've said, I just think this is such an accomplished film. And I think it looks so easy that people underestimate the depth of commentary in the film. And probably everybody who sees this film has had some time in their life, some kind of parent-child, father, daughter, father, son, mother, daughter, whatever it is, some kind of relationship difficulties. And it's just, or even relationship difficulties with the significant others. And she presents it in, it's a little too light for me to say a breezy manner, but with the delicate touch that has so much underneath it, so much embedded in all of those interactions that just feel like they're just kind of tossed off. There's nothing so serious here.
I've got a question from Jessica, but before I read that, I did want to say, please do type in any questions you have or comments, observations, anything. Put them in the Q&A box, or you can put them in the chat if you prefer. But while we're waiting on those, Jessica says that you mentioned that this is Sophia's most accessible film. Do you think that adds something or takes something away from the quality of the work?
I think it adds something, because I think it shows how multifaceted she is. I think it does. I think it shows that she can hit the ground with, look how different it was from Somewhere last week, or Lost in Translation, or The Virgin Suicide. I think it shows her range and her depth, her breadth, her ability to think about and present. And I think this film is beautifully staged and edited, beautifully composed. The art direction is terrific. I think it really shows her range, which is very much to her credit. Some directors have been accused of making the same film over and over and over. I don't think anybody will ever say that about Sofia Coppola. I don't think they'll say, but there were some criticisms, I remember, from the earlier sessions about, well, this is too privileged a world, and it's too white a world. And so I remember that with Virgin Suicides, it's like, well, that's what that film is about. And, that's its own critique in its own way. In this, of course, we have a multiracial couple, or maybe you just consider it even a Black couple, because Rashida is biracial and Marlon is obviously Black man. And it's not an issue, so it's just kind of like, this is a given. This is accepted, and that doesn't have to be part of the difficulties between them, which I think some other director may have tried to throw that in, layer it a little bit too much, perhaps. But that's not the difficulty here. But they certainly have privilege. People have talked about her lovely Soho apartment. But again, I think it's chosen, as I kind of ran through that, but I think it's chosen very carefully. You can see in, it's very nice that it's all that glass and it's white and it's beautiful. There's not a whole lot of color there, but it's very white and beautiful. But they don't see. And when they see at night, they don't see. Even when they see with binoculars, they don't see. We have to, again, get away from the city, go to Mexico, which is not a bad thing to do. Wish that we all could again pretty soon, to really see the truth, to learn the truth. But anyway, back to your question or your comment, Jessica, I think it's a great one to put this in the body of all of her work. I think it's really to her credit. Like I say, I don't think anybody's going to say about her, she made the same film every time.
I have a couple of questions of my own related to what you're just saying. One is, do you see this film as an intentional reaction against her critics? Like the fact that she had been so reliable in focusing not just on white women, but like very blonde white women typically. And here she focuses on a Black family. Or, in Lost in Translation, Bill and Mary was paired with a much younger actress who was maybe kind of a love interest, where here he's paired with a much younger actress who's his daughter. Do you think that this was deliberate in her kind of taking criticisms to heart or not?
I don't really know. I'd kind of be maybe playing backseat Freud or something. To say
so
that.
Fun.
It's so tempting because it's so autobiographical. I think it comes more from being Francis Ford's daughter, I mean, you can just see this circulating. Felix is an art dealer, but he might as well just be one of the most famous film directors ever, and know everybody, and everybody knows him. I think it comes much more from that, and from having two daughters. I think it comes more from, this is who I am at this point, and she's gained a lot of insight into that. I think she's thought a lot about, clearly being Francis Ford's daughter, that's inescapable. But she's fine. I think there's something in, I don't want to cut off your other question, but there's something, this film has been so reviewed. If you're interested, you can keep yourself busy all night. There were 192 external reviews on IMDb, 192, and 278 user reviews. So I'm sure they get redundant, but you can amuse yourself forever. But the one that I picked, and the Roger Ebert website is, I miss him, but it's still a very good website. And Scott Tafoya wrote, "First things first, this movie needed another half hour. There's no other way to explain the peculiar absence with which it leaves you. More time would make this souffle of a movie even richer. But if you can look beyond the 90-minute running time, depriving this movie of a more satisfying conclusion." And I was going to ask that, throw that out and say, how do you feel about the conclusion? Is it too artificial? Is it too heavy-handed? How do you feel about Felix? I think those are questions to consider about this film. There is not simply a lot to like. There's an embarrassment of riches crying out for perusal. On the Rocks is the kind of doodle only a truly skilled director could produce. But then he goes on to say, Coppola has made a couple of films about her complicated relationship to the real world and the famous men who tend to set its boundaries. But this is the first one that finds her small enough to admit her place in it happens to be in the shadow of the guy who helped coin cinematic grammar as we know it. It's a remarkably vulnerable thing to do this far into a career, all about debunking legends and iconoclastic gestures. And it's one of the many empathetic pleasures to be found in this frequently heartbreaking film. I think that's really nice observation.
The other thing that your discussion a minute ago was making me think about is we haven't had a heavy hand about it, but the idea behind these monthly director series is that we look at them as auteurs, we pick auteurs. But then I feel like some of your discussion and then Jessica's question points to this movie being sort of a one-off. I think in a lot of people's minds, whether they liked it or not, they see it as something like a director for hire work, which it's not, because she wrote and directed it. It's a very personal work. But I was wondering how you see it fitting into kind of like the larger tapestry of her films. Is it an extension of the things that she's obsessed with, or is it a maturation, or is it just, does it stand out on its own entirely? Like, where does it fit in with her larger oeuvre?
First of all, that's a great question. I think it's a maturation, because I think the others, as the presenters have excellently pointed out, they always have connections. But I think this is the one that goes psychologically deeper for her personally. I mean, it has her motherhood. It has her relationship. She was divorced once from a person she was married to before this. Who was it? Spike Jonze.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of that in this. I think it's her really looking in the mirror, which I think is a mature thing to do. At least it seems to me, maybe, we all kind of, it's like with Felix, all of the things he says about men's attitudes is a projection of his own subjective behavior. He's been a philanderer, he's had many affairs, etc. And yet he justifies it. He has his own self-justification. When Holly looked at me, your mother just paid attention. How many times have we heard these kind of things? Once the kids came along, your mother was just focused on them. And when suddenly I got the spotlight, it's like I just couldn't resist. And I think she's really facing and expressing some deep truths. And so to me, it's very mature that instead of escaping into, though I don't think she really escapes in those other films. I mean, they still have profound and poignant things to say. But I think this is the most personal of all, and the most vulnerable, and probably the riskiest for that. And that she makes it seem so easy, such a souffle. I think is pretty amazing. I think those are the hardest kind. I don't think there isn't any real bitterness in the film. There isn't any real hatred. Even Felix, though there are times when I want to say, now, Felix, Felix, you and I need to have a talk here. This isn't just we're hardwired this way. Come on, Felix. I probably, because it's Bill Murray, you can't help loving him. But, I've known people like him that you can't help but liking, even though you're saying, boy, that's really a kind of, patriarchal, outdated attitude. So no, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's really a maturation for her. Do you think so? I mean, let me know.
No, I do. I haven't succeeded really in putting my finger on it though, but I think it's interesting that she starts, her debut film was Virgin Suicides, which was largely about teenage girls. And like the mom was a cipher, where here the mom is the main character and the girls aren't teenagers, but they're the ciphers. Like it does kind of feel like she's getting older with her characters. That there's not a really linear trajectory there because of like Somewhere, for example. She does get a lot younger in that one.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, her characters sort of age with her. I don't know, almost something like Harry Potter or something if you watch them all like in toto. I did want to return to a point that you just talked about just now. I'm curious how likable we are to take Felix to be. I feel like if you read the character of Felix on the page, he doesn't come up very likable. He almost seems like a villain. But the fact that she cast Bill Murray in the role, who is so likable, and also she probably wrote the role with him in mind, although I don't know that for certain. So how likable do you think Sophia intended for him to be?
Well, what do you think? I think he's irresistible. Like I say, I want to grab him and say, Felix, get a grip. But there's the feminist in me coming out and saying, come on, Felix, you don't really believe that, do you? A lot of evidence to the contrary. So maybe he would say, well, look around, et cetera. But I think she has to have written this. I haven't read that, but I think she has to have written this with Bill Murray in mind. I mean, she has a close relationship with him. She knows that he can sell anything. I mean, he could probably play a serial killer and you'd love him, which would be the extreme. There are just so many scenes with him. I say, to me, he steals every scene. Even with the kids, when he's every girl should know how to shuffle. Every kid has to know how to shuffle. And he goes, and what else do you have to know? It's poker face. I just could watch those scenes over and over. They're so wonderful. She has to know that he could sell the grandpa. And he does, and he's so delighted in the kids. And he does reassure her too. This is the thing. This is the psychology that I love. I mean, he always says, "You're going to be okay, kid." He's honest with her. When she says, "Maybe you just got tired of me," he says, "Impossible." And he also tells that story about when she was just a little baby and the diaper was a mess. He says, when I knew who you were. And I mean, there clearly is just this abiding love for her. So how can you not like him even when you want to correct some of his attitudes? Yeah. Do you feel affection for it? I can imagine that some people probably don't.
I do. I love him, but I think that comes from Murray. It doesn't come from the way he's written. Like I said, I feel like she wrote him to be unlikable, and that just Murray can't help but be likable, basically.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the
What do you feel about Dean?
Dean, I think, is underwritten. I like him, and I like that he's a good guy who should have just been trusted from the outset, and then we wouldn't have a movie if she had trusted him. I think that kind of where she points him is interesting, but he could be fleshed out a little better. But that said, I think if he were fleshed out a little better, again, it would sort of make the movie not worth watching. Like he sort of needs to be unknowable for the movie to work. Yeah.
And I kept thinking of, it's probably because of Lost in Translation in Japan, I kept thinking of Japanese salarymen and thinking of, doesn't have to just be that. Anybody who has a startup, anybody who has their own business, they're going to be obsessed with it, and often to, ignoring and not paying enough attention to everybody else who's important in their lives.
Well, it's interesting too on the auteur aspect. Here, like in Lost in Translation, they go to Japan, of course, the whole movie's set in Japan. And then in Somewhere, which we watched last week, they go to Italy, and here they go to Mexico. She does like to have these kind of destination I don't know, like central points, not so much in the Virgin Suicides, but that one is very much about like quarantine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we're at the point where I need to wrap this up. I'm going to ask one more question, and if anybody in the audience wants to, if they have another question that they want to get up before we end, please type it in now.
Or I'd love to know how you feel about the characters. That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It doesn't have to be a question. Yeah, just go ahead and type in what you think at all. But no, my last question for you is I wanted you to elaborate maybe on the significance of the watches. You talked about how that was highly symbolic. And of course, your background is in English. So English majors love symbolism, right?
Yeah.
But the,
You got me.
right. I mean, like it's the deal with, Felix gives her his old watch that she used to love, but then in the end it's replaced by her husband's. But there's also a third watch. Before Felix gives his watch to her, she has her own, and she's kind of this cheapy, like Swatch looking thing. But yeah, why watches? Like, what is the symbolism behind it being a watch specifically and not, I don't know, anything else like a ring or something else, for example?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it could have been a ring. I'll have to think about that. To me, it just seemed, if it's jewelry, it's easy to circulate. I mean, it's just a nice prop. It's if it were anything more elaborate, it would be difficult to just pass along, or maybe it would strain credulity. And I find all of these scenes so believable. I don't know, watch keeps time. And there's the older watch and the younger watch, but you're right. I mean, it could have also been a ring. It could have been, it could have been any piece of jewelry. It works as a prop because, oh, gee, I didn't know how long that it would take for it to be engraved. So it explains, why, where she thinks that he's buying jewelry for his mistress, if she is, or the woman he is dallying with. But I mean, it could have been some other piece of jewelry. So watch, I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have a canned answer. I was just curious. It seems like it means
Yeah.
something, but again, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and watches circulate. I most of the time they circulate like in a Bergman film or even Fellini. I mean, I remember in Lestrada, of course, when the guy's watches hit and it breaks and then he dies. It's like you're out of time. But, in this, I don't know, we're marking time, we're paying attention to time. But beyond that, I'm sure I'm missing something.
Well, she's been so vocal too that she's largely inspired by Wong Kar-wai, and Wong Kar-wai is so obsessed with time, not watches so much, but clocks and things.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's actually the cinematographer on this, Philippe Lesorde, she got from Wong Kar-wai. He was the guy that shot The Grand Minister.
Yes. Yeah, he's a good cinematographer. Well, and at the end of this review that I was reading, he who writes this, what is his name? I like to give people credit. Scott